Are we still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? Yes, because if Epstein truly didn't matter, if the story was over, then why does every new development trigger a wave of deflection, noise, and distraction? If nobody cares, why are so many people working so hard to pull the conversation away from the parts that actually matter? Earlier this year, the Trump administration staged what looked like a major transparency moment. There were binders. There were handoffs to conservative influencers. There were promises of disclosure and accountability. But what the public got was mostly performance, not clarity. The rollout looked like sunlight. The result felt like fog. Then December arrived, and we finally received new documents. Enough to ignite the internet again, enough to fuel another cycle of outrage, memes, and instant verdicts. And while the timeline online narrowed into the most clickable distractions, Bill Clinton in a hot tub, flight log counts, name searches, photo obsessing. Did you notice what Rep. Thomas Massie quietly told the press? He said Epstein also had close ties to intelligence agencies, not only ours, but Israel's as well. That single statement should have stopped the conversation in its tracks. Instead, it barely made a ripple. At the same time, while people fixated on how many times Trump's name appeared in the logs, another detail slid past unnoticed. Ghislaine Maxwell had a helicopter pilot license, and helicopters don't require the same kind of flight logs as planes. That matters. It matters because it suggests there may have been movement between properties, between locations, between people that wouldn't show up in the paperwork everyone is treating like the final truth. Maybe the most important question of all is this: while these files were being released, were you paying attention to what else was happening in the world? Because I think that might be the point. The releases weren't just about informing the public. They were also about controlling attention. The internet has been ruthless, turning unverified tips into smoking guns within minutes, treating allegations as conclusions, and rewarding whoever speaks with the most certainty rather than whoever is the most accurate. In that environment, the real story, the intelligence connections, the protection network, the long-running blackmail structure people have suspected for years, gets buried under a mountain of documents so massive that nobody can realistically process it. 2 million pages isn't just information. It can be a weapon, a way to drown truth in volume. So I did something different. I stepped back. I focused on what could be verified. I separated what we know from what we're being pushed to believe, because this entire story has been surrounded by engineered confusion from the start. And if we're going to understand what really happened with Jeffrey Epstein, we have to keep our facts straight. This isn't just a recap. This is the full story of what most people missed, because the people who benefit from your confusion don't want you connecting the dots. This is who Epstein really was, who he was tied to, what he appeared to be doing, and why the truth still feels deliberately obscured. To understand how any of this is possible, you have to start with Epstein's origins, because once you see his backstory clearly, the official narrative starts to unravel. If you ask Google, you get the sanitized version. Teacher turned financier, mysterious billionaire, convicted sex offender. But that doesn't explain the shape of his rise. Epstein claimed he grew up working class in South Brooklyn, but records show he actually lived in Seagate, New York City's oldest gated community. In the 1950s and 60s, when Epstein was growing up there, Seagate was heavily Jewish and solidly middle class. His family home sat close to Seagate's oldest synagogue. That doesn't make him an elite, but it places him inside a specific social world, a world that understands networks, identity, and access in ways most people never have to think about. His parents, Seymour and Paula Epstein, were children of European immigrants, though the details of their origins remain unclear. And the question that matters is not whether his upbringing was humble or comfortable. The question is how a middle-class kid from a gated community ends up orbiting presidents, princes, and billionaires like it was inevitable. That's where the real story begins. Epstein's first major break came at the Dalton School, an elite Manhattan prep school where the children of New York's most powerful families were educated. At the time, the headmaster was Donald Barr, the father of future Attorney General Bill Barr, who had a reputation for hiring young people without traditional credentials. But even for Dalton, Epstein was an unusual hire. He was only 21 years old. He had no college degree. He dropped out of both Cooper Union and NYU. And yet he was placed in a position where he could teach, influence, and, most importantly, build relationships with the families who shape New York's wealth and power. Those connections turned into a doorway. In early 1976, Epstein attended an art gallery reception in Midtown Manhattan, invited by a Dalton parent. At that event, he was introduced to Ace Greenberg, a top executive at Bear Stearns, one of Wall Street's most powerful firms at the time. The parent reportedly told Greenberg that Epstein was wasting his time at Dalton. Greenberg invited him for an interview. And here's what should have disqualified Epstein immediately. By many accounts, Epstein didn't truly understand how Wall Street worked. He wasn't a finance prodigy. He wasn't a trained analyst. He didn't have a pedigree. But Greenberg hired him anyway. Why? Because Epstein's skill wasn't finance. His skill was persuasion. Epstein could charm wealthy people, read them, flatter them, and make them feel safe. He was a salesman in the purest sense, someone who could sell not just products, but trust. He was soon caught lying on his resume, claiming degrees he did not have, and they kept him anyway. Because whatever he lacked on paper, he made up for in one-trait institutions like that quietly reward. He could bring valuable people closer. One of Epstein's most important relationships inside Bear Stearns was with Jimmy Kane, a senior executive who would later run the firm. Colleagues have alleged Epstein helped Kane pursue women and obtain drugs. Kane praised Epstein and introduced him to lucrative clients. And that's where a pattern begins to emerge, because Kane, like Epstein, was also hired by Ace Greenberg, and Kane was also a college dropout. Greenberg had a preference. He openly said he liked hiring what he called PSD, people who were poor, smart, and driven by a deep desire to become rich. People who were hungry, people who might do things others wouldn't. And when you look at that selection logic, you have to ask a hard question. Was this firm simply hiring unconventional talent, or was it scouting for a specific personality type? People easier to mold, easier to motivate, easier to bind to a system. Because there are other details that make the picture stranger. Greenberg was a member of Zeta Beta Tau, a fraternity often described as the first Zionist fraternity in America, tied historically to a Hebrew phrase translated as "Zion shall be redeemed with justice." Greenberg was active in that world during the era Israel became a declared state. None of that is proof of anything on its own. But patterns aren't built from single facts. They're built from repeated alignments. Epstein grows up in a gated Jewish community. He's hired by an elite school despite no degree. He's pulled into Wall Street through a narrow social pipeline. He becomes valuable not because he's brilliant at finance, but because he's brilliant at managing the private appetites of powerful men. And when you stack those points together, the question becomes unavoidable. Was Epstein hired to be a financier, or was he selected because he was hungry, pliable, useful, and capable of serving something larger than the job description? To explore that, we have to talk about the man who handed Epstein the kind of power that transforms someone from a social climber into a kingmaker, Les Wexner. Wexner was the billionaire founder of L Brands, Victoria's Secret, The Limited, Bath and Body Works, and more. And for reasons that have never been fully explained, Wexner gave Jeffrey Epstein power of attorney over his fortune. That is an extraordinary decision. Power of attorney means Epstein could sign Wexner's name, make decisions on his behalf, and control major financial actions as if he were Wexner himself. Why would one of America's richest men give that kind of authority to a man with no degree and a mysteriously short Wall Street career? Wexner later claimed he was manipulated by Epstein, but that still doesn't explain the scale of what Epstein gained. Epstein ended up with Wexner's Manhattan mansion, the largest private residence in New York City, later linked to some of Epstein's most infamous crimes. And then there's another layer. Wexner founded the Wexner Foundation, an organization with a mission centered on strengthening leadership in the North American Jewish community and the State of Israel. Epstein was listed as a trustee. He approved grants. He signed documents appointing officers. He was named president of the Wexner Family Financial Office. But according to later reviews, Epstein was largely absent from the foundation's day-to-day life. He had no office there. Leaders said they rarely saw him. So what does that mean? It means he had real power on paper, through signatures, through authority, without visibility. A ghost with access. A man who could move resources without being present in the places those resources were supposedly governed. From there, the transformation accelerates. Epstein goes from teaching G-math to managing billions, backed by one of the wealthiest men in America, connected to leadership programs tied to Israel. Once he has that backing, doors open everywhere. And Epstein doesn't use those doors for normal networking. He uses them to build a collection: presidents, prime ministers, Nobel Prize winners, billionaires, scientists, celebrities, CEOs, academics. Not a friend group, a portfolio. Names associated with Epstein's orbit are publicly documented and widely reported. Bill Clinton, photographed and tied to flights on Epstein's private jet. Donald Trump, seen with Epstein in the 1990s and early 2000s. Prince Andrew. Bill Gates, who later acknowledged and regretted meetings with Epstein after Epstein's conviction. Prominent academics and public intellectuals. Well-known celebrities and business figures. Epstein had access to everyone. And that brings us to the question that makes the whole story structurally different from a normal scandal. This wasn't just a man who partied with famous people. This was a man who collected powerful people. And when someone collects powerful people, you have to ask why. What's the purpose? Because the answer is rarely admiration. More often, it's leverage. Which leads into the darkest and most politically explosive part of this story, the intelligence angle. I want to be careful here because intelligence connections can become a lazy conspiracy catch-all. But I'm not dealing in vibes. I'm dealing in what has been publicly reported, what has been documented, and what credible people have stated on record. And based on the publicly available information, it is plausible, arguably likely, that Epstein wasn't merely a predator with powerful friends. He may have been operating in a space where intelligence agencies intersect with compromat, blackmail, and control. Start with the most discussed link, Israel. Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's closest associate and convicted accomplice, was the daughter of Robert Maxwell. Robert Maxwell wasn't just a British media mogul. He was surrounded for years by allegations of ties to Israeli intelligence, specifically Mossad. He fought public claims suggesting those links, and then he died after falling from his yacht into the Atlantic. The death itself is debated, accident, suicide, something else. But what followed is what made global observers pause. Maxwell received a major state-connected funeral in Jerusalem, burial on the Mount of Olives, and attendance by top Israeli figures and intelligence-linked leadership. That level of honoring sends a message, whether implicit or explicit, that Maxwell mattered to the state in ways beyond business. There are also threads connecting Maxwell to British intelligence ecosystems, and there are deeply uncomfortable implications anytime someone with alleged intelligence ties holds major influence over media and educational publishing. Whether or not it proves espionage, it signals something important: proximity to information control. And then Maxwell's daughter becomes Epstein's partner in one of the most infamous criminal operations of modern times. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe it is. But it's a coincidence with consequences. Then consider the documented presence of Ehud Barak, former Prime Minister of Israel, and a figure historically tied to Israeli security leadership, visiting Epstein's Manhattan townhouse after Epstein's 2008 conviction. Barak later acknowledged visiting multiple times and claimed the relationship was professional. But again, why would someone with that background repeatedly visit a convicted predator's home? Even if innocent, it's a decision that demands explanation. Next comes the claim from Ari Ben-Menash, a former Israeli intelligence operative, who has stated that Epstein worked for Israeli intelligence and that Epstein and Maxwell were brought into that network by Robert Maxwell in the late 1980s. Ben-Menash describes a honeypot-style operation. Entrap powerful people, gather compromising material, and use it for leverage. You can't treat a claim like proof. But you also can't ignore it when it matches the structure of what Epstein was demonstrably doing. Systematically surrounding himself with the powerful, operating in private properties, organizing secretive access, collecting connections, and surviving legal consequences that should have buried him. Because the 2008 plea deal is one of the biggest red flags in the entire story. Epstein was facing serious charges involving minors. He should have gone away for decades. Instead, he received an almost unbelievable deal. A short county jail sentence with work release, meaning he could leave jail every day to go to his office. The federal prosecutor involved was Alexander Acosta. Years later, during the scrutiny around Acosta's nomination under Trump, Acosta reportedly said he was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. That statement, if accurately reported, changes everything. It suggests protection from above the normal legal system. It suggests Epstein wasn't just defended by lawyers. He was shielded by a classification barrier. Then the story gets murkier still with reporting that Epstein had meetings with William Burns, who later became CIA director after Epstein's conviction. The question isn't whether meetings alone prove wrongdoing. The question is why anyone in serious national security circles would risk proximity to a convicted predator unless there was some reason that outweighed the reputational cost. This is where simplistic partisan frames fail. Some people say Israel, some say Russia, some say Britain, some say America, but what if it wasn't either? Or what if Epstein was a hub in an overlapping world of intelligence interests, where different agencies, different actors, and different agendas intersected, even if they didn't coordinate neatly? If that's true, you might never find a clean paper trail. National security experts have noted that if an intelligence-asset relationship exists, the absence of documentation can be a feature, not a bug, because neither side wants it casually discovered. So put the pieces together. Epstein built relationships with presidents and CEOs. He owned properties described as surveilled and controlled environments. He placed young women around powerful men. He cultivated secrecy. He gathered leverage. He survived consequences in ways that look unnatural. And when he faced real exposure in 2019, this time on federal sex trafficking charges, he died before testifying. On August 10, 2019, Epstein was found dead in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, officially ruled suicide. But the circumstances have fueled suspicion for years. He had been on suicide watch and was removed. Guards failed to perform required checks. Cameras malfunctioned. He was left alone, and independent examinations raised questions about whether the injuries aligned more with homicide than hanging. I'm not declaring what happened. I'm stating the structural reality. Epstein died before he could speak under oath in a way that could implicate an entire network. And the symmetry becomes almost uncanny when you remember Robert Maxwell, the man with alleged intelligence ties, also died under contested circumstances after falling from a yacht into the ocean. Two men, both connected to dark power networks, both holding potentially damaging information, both dying in ways that leave the public permanently uncertain. Maybe coincidence, maybe pattern. Either way, it's a pattern the world has seen before. People who know too much rarely get neat endings. So then we arrive at the promise that was supposed to change everything: the files. In November 2025, Congress passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act with overwhelming support. Trump signed it into law, giving the Justice Department 30 days to release everything. And on the deadline in December, the DOJ dropped hundreds of gigabytes of documents: photos, testimony-related materials, evidence files, witness statements, and more, with additional releases continuing. So what did we actually learn? Some genuinely important things. The FBI was warned about Epstein much earlier than many people realized. A survivor, Maria Farmer, reported him to the FBI in September 1996, more than a decade before his first arrest, and nothing meaningful happened. The files also included disturbing witness statements describing deliberate targeting of underage girls. They suggested investigators were tracking multiple potential co-conspirators, yet those names remain redacted. The network remains hidden. And then the helicopter detail returns. Survivors have stated Maxwell could fly helicopters and that victims may have been moved between properties. The released materials included images of Maxwell flying helicopters. If transportation occurred by helicopter, between mainland locations and private islands, for instance, there may be no official log comparable to plane records. That doesn't prove who went where, but it does explain why flight logs on their own might never tell the full story. There are other strange artifacts too, like a photographed Austrian passport found in Epstein's home, issued under a false name, with a Saudi address and stamps from various countries. Why would Epstein have a fake passport? That detail alone suggests a man who planned for mobility, concealment, and multiple identities. But here's where the release becomes dangerous. It mixes verified evidence with unverified submissions. It includes tips, some horrifying, filed through systems that can be abused by anyone. A tip is not proof. A tip is not corroboration. A tip is not a finding. People confuse reported to the FBI with investigated and confirmed by the FBI, and those are completely different realities. The more chaotic the release, the easier it is for bad actors to weaponize it in both directions, to smear with certainty or to dismiss Eve. Writhing as propaganda. And the redactions are staggering, whole pages blacked out, entire documents obscured, inconsistent redaction where the same information is hidden in one place and visible in another. Redactions that appear sloppy enough that people online have claimed they could recover text underneath. Which leads to the unavoidable question. If the law says you can't redact simply because something is embarrassing, then why does so much look like it's being hidden for reasons beyond victim protection or active investigations? Then the DOJ announced they found over 1 million additional documents potentially related to the case. And later, It was admitted that everything released so far represents less than 1% of what they have. Less than 1%. Which means what we're being asked to treat as the truth is, at best, an early fragment of a much larger archive. An archive the public may never see. So where does that leave us? It leaves us in a place that is infuriating precisely because it is honest. There are no clean smoking guns in the way the internet wants. There are new details. There are disturbing allegations. There are suspicious, repeating connections. But there is no official document that says, here is the handler, here is the agency, here is the client list. And if Epstein was part of an intelligence-adjacent blackmail operation, the most damning material was never going to sit neatly in public files. It would have been on private servers, in private safes, in classified channels, destroyed, locked away, or still being used. Meanwhile, the world keeps moving. Major geopolitical decisions continue. New pressures and agendas are openly discussed. And the Epstein story risks becoming background noise, exactly as a system would prefer if it wanted public attention scattered and exhausted. But here's what I keep coming back to: the victims, the girls who were trafficked, the women who survived, the people who have spent years fighting for justice while the world treats their trauma like political ammunition. They don't get to move on. They don't get to tune out, so neither can we. Because this isn't just about Jeffrey Epstein. It's about a system that protected him for decades. It's about whether we accept less than 1% of the files as accountability. It's about whether we allow redaction and overload to become a substitute for justice. It's about whether the people who helped him, whoever they are, get to disappear behind black ink forever. So we keep the conversation alive, but we keep it disciplined. We keep asking questions, but we verify before we accuse. We resist the temptation to trade accuracy for adrenaline. Because if this story was engineered to confuse the public, then clarity becomes an act of resistance. And while we keep our eyes on Epstein, we also keep our eyes on what else is happening, the stories that benefit from our distraction. If you want to stay informed, if you want to see me break down what's really happening in Venezuela and why the public explanation never matches the actual incentives, subscribe to this channel. And if this video helped you make sense of the chaos, share it with someone you trust. The more people who stay focused, the harder it becomes for anyone, government, media, or intelligence-adjacent power to bury the truth indefinitely. I'm going to keep digging. I'm going to keep researching. I'm going to keep making videos because the truth is out there. It's just buried under layers of classification, institutional protection, and powerful people who would prefer you argue about surface-level drama instead of tracing the deeper structure. And if you want to understand more about the connections I've been tracing, how foreign influence, money, and power intersect in Washington, check out my video on Trump's ties to Israel. Because none of these stories exist in isolation. They connect. And we're not stopping until we get closer to the truth, because the victims deserve that, and so do we. Thank you for watching.